In this video, we're going to talk about conditional statements. Languages have usually one or two conditional statements that you can use. Sometimes these are referred to as constructs. The if-else combination or the switch case. Not all languages have both of these, but most modern languages do. And if they don't have switch case, like Python doesn't, they have something similar, like Python's elif. Let's take a look at the one that's pretty much every language you'll ever come across. That's if and else combination. The general pattern for that this is pseudocode, so it doesn't really run, but it gives you the pattern. If something is true, if a particular condition evaluates to true, then you're going to do one or more statements. And those statements only run if this condition is true. Otherwise, you'll execute a different set of statements if that condition is not true. In Python, the code would look something like this. Let's make a variable. We'll call it integer var1. We'll set it to 1 and check to see whether or not it's true that it is 1. If it is, I'll print out something. In this case, I just print out 1. Otherwise, I print out other. So I would come over here and say v1 equals 1 if v1, and you'll notice the double equal signs for the comparison operator. Oops, how about a parenthesis instead? I'll print out true, and it should print out a t there just for the fact that it's true that 1 is equal to 1. Now if you just go ahead and put in a different number and try the same test again, you get nothing, and that's because without the else statement it does not go through and print anything. So I'll go ahead and put in an else, and now I'll tell it to print out something different. So when something is not true, it'll go ahead and do the second statement. And of course in Python, if you have one or more statements and they are, oops, I'm holding down the control button and dragging. Don't remember if it works in the Mac, but it does in Windows. Control, left click, and drag. And it prints out multiple statements. So very easy concept, and certainly you'll find it in tons of different languages. And in general, they all look pretty much the same too. So a if with the else optional piece is extremely common, and you will find a lot of opportunities to use that. So as it says here, you can have more than one statement, and if there's only one keyword, or excuse me, if only one statement's in there, you can choose to go ahead and put it right next to it after the colon. This is equivalent. That doesn't really work well if you have multiple statements, but for a single statement you can save some space. Some people don't like it, other people don't care. I think it's fine either way. Now in many languages there is a switch case or select case option. Python doesn't have that exactly, but it has something very similar. Again, a Wikipedia article will kind of walk through some information about how switch case or select works. It's probably worth your look at, since the class is more than just about Python. You'll see some additional stuff through here about it here. But let me just give you the general pattern of what it would look like. You would have some kind of expression, and then you check to see if that expression evaluate to this item or this item, and if nothing matches this item. See if I can explain that a little bit better. Okay, so let's say that this thing evaluates to Bob, the name Bob. You can check to see if it's Bob. If it does, you do some code. If not, you can check to see if it's another one, like, I don't know, Sue. And if it doesn't match either Bob here or Sue here, then it can just go through and run a default code. It's kind of like the if statement, except that you're asking for an additional option afterwards. So let's say that I ask, is it true that it's equal to 1? And then I immediately ask, is it true that it's equal to 2? And then if it isn't, I just go ahead and say, okay, it's equal to something that's not 2 or not 1. This would be the equivalent in principle to else, the switch case. So you have some kind of statement, and then you evaluate whether or not you get a match. And if you do, you perform an action, one or more actions. Now the thing is that with Python, this first if statement, run this. This first if statement evaluates to true. I get a T. And the second one also fires and evaluates to true, and I get an F because it's not true. Let me change this over a little bit. Let me put 2 there. Oops, excuse me. Put a 1 here. So now it's going to evaluate whether or not it's 1. And you'll see that it evaluates true twice. That's because for all intents and purposes, this is a standalone statement, and then you run this. And the else is associated with only that last if. So in a else if, it's a little bit different. What happens is I take code like this and I evaluate whether or not this one is a match for 1. If it's not, the elif is a part of the if. It's all part of one big block of code. And it asks the question, okay, if it's not 1, is it 2? And then if it's not either 1 or 2, then it goes through and says something like, oh, please choose 1 or 2. Let me copy that code and I'll show you. Very, very similar, but we have elif, and that makes it a part of the if block. So it's all one big block of statements. And this time it evaluates the true. Now let's also go ahead and change this over to 2 and run it again. You'll notice that this time it only evaluates on the first one, prints out 1. But the deal is it never got to line 3. That's because this being all one big block of code, as soon as it finds a match, it's out of there. It doesn't actually go any further. It doesn't have to run line 3, it doesn't have to run line 4. It considers that block complete and it goes all the way down to line 5. Now, this is something that other languages don't support. Instead, what happens is that if you were using a different language, the code might fall through, as they call it. You can read more about this on Wikipedia, but in those languages, you have to explicitly break out of the statement. You have to break out of the if statement. Python doesn't force you to do that. It automatically breaks out. Once it finds a match, it breaks out of that block of code. Okay. Other things you should know about a conditional statement: sometimes you want to go through and evaluate more than one item. So if it's true that it's 1 and it's true that the name is Bob, both of these have to be true before it will print out 1 and Bob. You can also use OR, in which case only one item has to be true. You can also have a nested if statement. A nested if statement is one inside of another. Now this may look similar, but it's not. It would be equivalent to this. And what's happening now is, actually it's not happy with that. It wants it like that. Now what's happening now is that this if statement, if it fires off, and it will print out 1, and then it will evaluate this statement. It'll print out 2. That's because it's nested inside of here. You can go many layers deep. Most of the time you only go about 2 or 3 layers. If something is true, then test a condition, and if it's true, then test another condition. In the next lab, we're going to play with this a little bit, but hopefully at this point, I should say, you should have a pretty good understanding what an if statement does. And of course, we'll be working with it all quarter long, so you'll have plenty of opportunities. I'll see you in the next video, in which case we'll take a look at the lab.